Words he used. Clinton was very clear in putting blame not on individual states or governments, but on the long-term global Western policy imposed by the United States, European Union, and enacted for decades by the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and other international institutions. This policy pressed African and Asian countries into dropping government subsidies for fertilizer, improved seed and other farm inputs, thus opening up the way for the best land to be used for export crops and for ruining the country's food self-sufficiency. The result of such structural adjustments was the integration of local agriculture into global economy. While crops were exported, farmers thrown out of their land were pushed into slums, available for outsourced sweatshops, and countries had to rely more and more on the imported food. In this way, third world countries are kept in post-colonial dependence and made more and more vulnerable to market fluctuations. The skyrocketing of grain prices, also caused by the use of crops for biofuels, in the last years already caused starvation in countries from Haiti to Ethiopia, as we know. And there is, recently, this was reported in the media. I'm slowly becoming a believer into bourgeois liberal media, in the sense that, no, in a quite naive sense that, in a way, everything is said there. You just really have to read it. For example, I read some pretty horrible news which was reported in the media, but nobody even reacted to it. Of this, what is really happening now on the international agricultural market? The exact opposite of what Clinton is advocating. That is to say, major international corporations and governments try to compensate for shortages of arable land in their own countries by setting up massive industrial farms abroad. For example, now, 2-3 weeks ago, Daewoo Logistics from South Korea negotiated a 99 years lease on around 3.2 million acres of farmland in Madagascar. It's, to cut a long story short, half of Madagascar's arable land. It will be used strictly for export, 3/4 corn for biofuels, 1/4 palm oil. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I read this, I think, in Time magazine. Again, no leftist propaganda, if you are afraid of it. They say that also, for example, British Sun Biofuels is buying land in Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. The first two, at least according to the media, identified as lands with hunger, and so on and so on. So again, we are getting this paradox of exactly the opposite. The developed countries are confronting food crisis by impoverishing even more the third world countries by way of buying land there and growing it for export and so on and so on. So again, Clinton, back to Clinton. Clinton was right to say that, quote from Clinton, "Food is not a commodity like others. We should go back to a policy of maximum food self-sufficiency. It is crazy for us to think we can develop countries around the world without increasing their ability to feed themselves." End of quote. There are nonetheless, I think, two things to add to Bill Clinton here. First, one should note how, while imposing the globalization of agriculture on the third world countries, the developed Western countries are taking great care of maintaining their own food self-sufficiency. Recall, for example, that in European Union, everybody knows that the financial support of our own farmers takes more than half of the entire European Union budget. So we are already cheating here while advising third world countries, no food self-sufficiency, open yourself to the market. We are doing exactly the opposite. This is why the old phrase by Marx, you know, when in Communist Manifesto he says, "You accuse us of communism, but for the ruling elite, you already have communism." It's the same, and incidentally, it's the same also, you know, when poor Republicans who were shocked at this plan to spend 700 billion for, to help banks, they said, "But this is socialism." But this was always the system. Capitalism always meant communism for the ruling class itself. It's always nothing new in that. The second thing to reproach is that the list of products and things which are not, as Clinton put it, commodities like others, is much longer. So, you know, I would proceed here as a cynico-ironical leftist by agreeing, yeah, commodity production is okay, just we should be aware that there are maybe some things which shouldn't be totally treated like commodities. Like, we agree with Bill Clinton, food, then everyone would agree, defense, my God, every patriot would agree that defense cannot be treated as a commodity. Then water, everybody would agree, energy, environment, culture, education, health. So again, while totally being pro-market, I would say, just take into account all these exceptions, so that at the end, what remains, what should be definitely left to market forces, maybe those cheap toys made in China. There I'm totally pro-capitalist, brutal market forces. So now, let me conclude with a little bit of more theory. What the present situation makes me aware of is that we should distinguish two different modes of ideological mystification. They should not be confused. On the one hand, the liberal democratic, I call it, in that name, just to identify it, don't take designation to see, and the other hand, the fascist one. The first ideological mystification concerns false universality. For example, the subject advocates freedom equality, not being aware of implicit qualifications, which in their very form constrain the scope of universal freedom equality and so on. You know, freedom equality, but implicitly you constrain it, limit it to certain groups, only men, only rich men, only white men, and so on. The second mystification, the fascist one, typically targeting the Jews, concerns the false identification of the antagonism and of the enemy. Class struggle is displaced onto the struggle against the Jews, so that the popular rage at being exploited is redirected from capitalist relations as such to the Jewish plot, to the Jews. So to put it in naive hermeneutic terms, in the first case, liberal democratic ideology, when we say freedom and equality, we really mean freedom of trade, equality in front of the law, and so on and so on. While in the second case, when we say Jews are the cause of our misery, we really mean big capital is the cause of our misery. We just displace it onto Jews. But the asymmetry is clear. To put it again in naive terms, in the first case, the good explicit content. In the first case, liberal democratic ideology. Because to put it naively, I'm consciously naive here. The explicit content is good. There is nothing bad about equality, human rights in themselves. So the good explicit content, freedom, equality, covers up the bad implicit content, class and other privileges and so on. While in the second case, the fascist anti-Semitism, the bad explicit content, for us at least, anti-Semitism of course, as every racism is bad, covers up the good implicit content, class struggle, hatred of exploitation. You notice how it's exactly the opposite. Now comes the problem. For anyone versed in psychoanalytic theory, the inner structure of the two ideological mystifications is that of the couple symptom fetish. The implicit limitations are the symptoms of liberal egalitarianism. Liberal egalitarianism, but this how egalitarian ideology can cover up real class differences, this is the symptomatic point, the symptomatic exception. While Jew is the fetish of the anti-Semitic fascists, as it were, you know, like Freud used this term, fetish is the last thing you see before seeing that the woman has no penis. It's the last thing the subject sees before seeing the class struggle. You focus on that. This asymmetry has crucial consequences for the critico-ideological process of demystification. Now I come to a problem. Apropos liberal egalitarianism, it is not enough to make the old Marxist point about the gap between the ideological appearance of the universal legal form